Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 8th of October. Today we're talking about day 2 of the war between Israel and the factions in Gaza. We're gonna first start off with the frontline updates, then we're gonna look at the airstrikes within Gaza itself, and then we're gonna go further north and look at the border between Israel and Lebanon. Let's begin further south, where there actually were reports by Israeli sources, the IDF, that they said they were able to reestablish control over the village of Kerem Shalom. And there wasn't really any mention of the border crossing, but that's also an important a piece of infrastructure in the area. But there wasn't really any other information to back that up. And we haven't really heard much about the southern front. And when I talk about the southern front, I mean about the area to the south of Rafah. This is Rafah, and then southern front, I guess, would be this area over here. We haven't heard much about this area. There is less of a Hamas presence over here, but nonetheless, I do still think that we have to wait for more evidence before we change the map. But there are recent reports by Israeli media that there are ongoing clashes and firefights in the direction of Holit, Sufa, and then also near Yitzhak. And so those areas, it appears that the IDF moved in forces into those areas, but that in the past few hours, Hamas, they just sent additional men across the border fence. Because remember, in a lot of these areas, there were bulldozers that Hamas took over and they utilized them to destroy certain sections of the border fence. So it's not that difficult for Hamas fighters to advance a couple hundred meters and re-enter or maybe just reach the outskirts of some of these villages. They're only a couple of kilometers away. Now, if we're going to go a bit further to the north, to the more so eastern front of the situation, the Israeli IDF, they sent in upwards of 35 battalions and also a lot of their infantry brigades. One of them is the Nahal Infantry Brigade. There's actually a lieutenant colonel, I think I mentioned this yesterday, that was killed in the fighting around Kerem Shalom. So we know that the Nahal Infantry Brigade is located over here. Israel has 5 of them. So at least one of them has been moved in. And then those 35 battalions, at least some of them were involved in taking back some of the villages that Hamas took over in the early hours of the war. So they established full control of the village of Magen near Oz. In Nirim, there was a pretty significant clash, and Israeli side reports that they were able to kill 9 of the Hamas members that were trying to hold out, and then also Ain Hashlosha. If we go to Kisufim in this region, there are still reports of fighting over there. In a lot of these villages, what you have is that there were active hostage situations, and then the IDF was able to go in and evacuate most of the civilians. In a lot of these areas, there are still civilians located. But then once the IDF is present in these areas, you have instances where Hamas fighters, they barricade themselves within some of the houses, and that's why you still consider those villages to be contested. So I suppose something like that could be happening in Kisufim, especially because of how close it is to the border fence. It's like 1 or 2 kilometers away. And if we go a bit to the east, another area where the IDF was able to advance was in the direction of Ra'im. What happened over here is that, first of all, the Israelis took back the Ra'im military base. This is one of, I believe, 3 or 4 military bases that Hamas was able to at least temporarily enter and plunder a lot of the resources. Remember, it wasn't just Hamas that were actively involved. You had other factions, but you also had a lot of civilians that crossed over the border and they actually entered into these military bases. There's a lot of footage of them just going around taking stuff and then going back. So it does seem like IDF has presence in this area and has also reestablished control of Ra'im. In Be'eri, there were reports from the Israeli side. Again, I'm mainly mentioning the Israeli side because a lot of the Israeli media, like Ynet, News 12, they're giving like specific updates on villages, and that's a big part of what I'm trying to look at. What they said is that the IDF is now present again in Be'eri, and that they're beginning the evacuation of those 50 hostages that I mentioned in my previous video, but that some of the Hamas fighters are still barricaded in the houses over here. Apparently, all of the hostages, they were like rounded up in a cafeteria within the kibbutz. So that's the current situation over here. They're still fighting in that village. And Alumim, again, I haven't been able to find any information about this village. It may be a similar situation where there's just like firefights going on the outskirts of the village. Nahal Oz, again, IDF last night reported they were able to recapture it. I'm a bit skeptical. That's why I'm leaving it in a gray zone, and also the adjacent military base is because of how close it is to some of the key Hamas locations, like in Gaza City over here. If we go to Kfar Aza, Israeli sources and also the Palestinian sources report that there are clashes in this village. So fighting continues over there. Now in Sderot, it is safe to say that the IDF and the Israeli police have a very strong presence over here. And that really started in the afternoon of yesterday. They moved in their forces. They began clearing out block by block. They were able to, first of all, get the civilians out. A lot of the civilians in this region, they're being evacuated away from the Gaza envelope. Gaza envelope, as I said before, is a piece of land that is 5 to 10 kilometers away from the Gaza Strip. So basically, like all of this area over here would fall under the Gaza envelope. So the Israeli plan is to evacuate the very least civilians over the next 24 hours from the 4 kilometers that are closest to the Gaza border fence. They want to move them to the Negev region, perhaps to some of the other settlements over here, like Beersheba, all around the center of Israel as well. Now, in Sderot, again, what I'll say is that for the most part, there's no more Hamas presence over here. There may be firefights on the outskirts, like over here, where I have these blue squares located, but within the actual streets, there's nothing anymore. The last basically holdout in Sderot was in the Sderot police station. The Sderot police station, this is really one of the focal points of the entire war, is because of all the footage that we got from this area. What happened was in the first day, the Hamas fighters, they were able to take it over. They were able to basically catch the Israeli police off guard. They were totally not prepared. They were on a break, so a lot of them didn't even have firearms on them, so there wasn't much they could even do. 20 of them got killed, and then since then there's a report that 30 police officers got killed, but those other 10 could be from other places in the Gaza envelope. Either way, what happened was once the Israeli forces were able to, regroup and move in their own resources, the Palestinians, at least 10 of them, they basically congregated within that police station. They tried to barricade themselves, but Israeli forces, they destroyed it with a bulldozer. You could see that this is a damage as a result of the bulldozer. And as the Israelis were destroying the police station in order to capture these Hamas militants, they escaped, but eventually what the Israeli side is claiming is that they were able to kill all 10 as they were escaping. Now, moving on to the situation on the northern front, and by northern front, I mean to the north of the Gaza Strip, so like Jabalia, and then in the direction of the major city Ashkelon. What we're seeing now is that there's still no reports of Israel being able to recapture the Erez border crossing, and that they have been unable to capture the key military base, to my knowledge. But the Hamas forces, they actually tried to land on the Zakim Beach. Zakim Beach is located over here. And basically the idea was that they would be able to infiltrate Israeli territory through there and then take over the village of Zakim itself. And I believe that a more broad goal would be for them to launch raids into Ashkelon. And that's something that we saw actually happen earlier yesterday. There were numerous boats that tried to land on the beaches in Ashkelon, but there was no Hamas success over there. The Israelis were able to destroy all the boats, and today they were able to kill 5 of the Hamas fighters that attempted to land on the Zakim beach. So that's the status on the front line more generally. But when we look at the airstrikes, because over the course of the entire night, and obviously I'm talking about local time, throughout the entire course of the night, the Israelis claim that they hit over 400 targets in their airstrikes using their Air Force, helicopters, and also drones. A lot of Gazans on the ground were talking about how in the evening leading up to the strikes, there were a lot of drones that were just flying above the Gazan airspace. So they were certainly preparing for a large barrage of strikes. So here we have some footage that was released by the IDF showing the extent of the damage. Here they release film of them targeting residential buildings where they claim that there were Hamas military targets. And you can see that it's not just in one of these residential buildings, it's in the entire block. There's a lot of fire at these specific buildings. And the most notable building that was targeted yesterday was the Palestine Tower. So here we actually have a view of the Palestine Tower. It's the tower over here. Apparently, it experienced a roof knock before, so what that means is that like the IDF they'll launch some sort of smaller yield bomb. It might even be dull, but it makes like a noise, like a shaking noise, and then that's supposed to be like the notification for people to leave the building before it's going to be struck. So also right before I played the video, in this headline it says it launched more than 2,500 rockets from Gaza. Now the estimate for the amount of rockets that were fired by the Hamas factions is up to 3,500. But here, just get a view of the live explosion. You can see pretty crazy stuff. You can see the full extent of the damage that was incurred by the specific building. That it's claimed that there was some sort of military assets of Hamas over there. So the video I just showed you guys was actually the flashbang that hit the roof, and then here's what happened afterwards, where the building itself was completely leveled. In terms of Hamas rocket strikes today, I would say I've been looking at the red alerts, where the alerts that are given to Israeli citizens in the villages that they're located in. There's been a lot of strikes at different villages in the Gaza envelope, also as far north as Ashkelon, but like all around the border regions. Less so in the direction of central Israel around Tel Aviv and Ashdod. But like last night, there was a pretty large amount of strikes in that direction. And there were some direct hits that led to deaths and casualties in the center of Israel, like in Tel Aviv, Holon, Rishon LeZion, Bat Yam, like all these different key cities in central Israel. But today it was more so just like rocket and mortar fire on a smaller scale in the direction of the Gaza envelope. Now let's look at the casualties. And the very sad part is that unfortunately the death counts and the injury counts are definitely higher than the official sources claim. So the most recent casualty count from the Palestinian Ministry of Health, they say that there were 313 killed and 1,990 that are injured. Then on the Israeli side, they report that there are 350 dead and 1,800 wounded. And the officials in Israel, they are claiming that there are dozens that were captured by Hamas that were then moved back into Gaza and are now being held hostage, not in Israel itself, but actually in Gaza itself. So you have some hostages that are still located in villages in the Gaza envelope, in those kibbutzim, and then you have other Israelis that were taken hostage by Hamas forces that have been moved back into the Gaza Strip itself. The IDF claims that throughout the fighting yesterday and today, they were able to kill 400 Hamas fighters. So I think that 400 number would just be completely unrelated to the 313 number that was released by the Palestinian Ministry of Health, because what they're looking at are more so the casualties that they immediately noticed from the airstrikes that were launched by Israel. So I think when you add those numbers up, 313 and 400 is going to be way, way higher. But those are 400 claimed by the Israeli side, also claimed that they were able to capture dozens of Hamas forces. And that's true. I won't show the photos, but there are a lot of photos of captured Hamas fighters in different villages, even as far east as Ofakim, where you had some Hamas fighters that were able to infiltrate and eventually they were subdued. Same thing in Netivot. So yeah, I can confirm that's true. And additionally, the IDF, they released a list of 26 soldiers that they admitted were killed in the fighting on the Gaza envelope front. And the most notable casualty out of that was a 36-year-old man. He was a commander in the 481st Signal Battalion, and I believe he was a lieutenant colonel. But the real number of IDF casualties, I've seen numbers from like the Gaza envelope that are a bit higher from the Israeli side that are saying that it's like 40 or 50. We're gonna have to wait and see. Meanwhile, we have the Israelis that are building up forces. This video is a video of equipment that was moved in the direction of Sderot. And what you could see is that the Israelis are now calling up a lot of their reservists. In Hebrew, they're called miluim. So it's like 150,000 reservists that received orders to report for duty. And then, as you can see in these videos, there's a huge amount of equipment that was listed, 155 millimeter self-propelled howitzers, support vehicles, M113 vehicles. And then I saw a hell of a lot of Humvees in videos yesterday that were circulating through Israeli mainstream media. Now moving on to the most important news in my opinion, and this is because if Hezbollah gets involved in the war, that would significantly increase the scale of destruction and it would be a major escalation. And so this is a video that was released by Hezbollah actually. You can see they're firing the mortars from some sort of forested patch, probably somewhere in the mountains of southern Lebanon. Here you can see that's a radar station on this is in Israeli territory that they control in Sheba Farms, which is contested between Israel, Lebanon, Syria, but Israel has a military force over there. And what you can see is that they hit Mount Dov. Mount Dov is this mountain where you have a lot of radars that are trying to keep track of missiles that could potentially come in from Lebanon or Syria. You could see this is the extent of their destruction that they reported. The Hezbollah fighters now, in response to the strike by Hezbollah, and Hezbollah claimed that they were able to target three of these locations by three IDF locations. In response, the Israelis, they launched their own artillery strikes towards Hezbollah positions. And here is the footage that was released by the IDF showing that they destroyed some sort of Hezbollah position, looks like a tent, somewhere near Sheba Farms. So I'll show the map after this video is over to give you guys an idea. Basically, the Hezbollah rocket and mortar fire, it was aimed in the direction of Sheba Farms. Sheba Farms is located over here. And then Mount Dor, the mountain that you saw in that video by Hezbollah, Mount Dov, sorry, it's located over here, very close to the border with Lebanon. And then also a lot of the reports were mentioning that the strikes were near the Lebanese village of Kfar Kuba, which is located over here. And then the Israelis more generally targeted Hamas positions in that same region over here. And so we're going to have to wait and see if this escalates. I think the fact that they hit Sheba Farms and not deeper into Israel could be a sign that perhaps it won't escalate, but we have to wait and see. Since the strikes and the tit for tat between Israel and Hezbollah in the morning, there hasn't been anything to my knowledge. Maybe something happened while I was recording this video. But yeah, that's all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.